So I've been meaning to replace this hastily constructed squash corral for a while. The 6x6 dimensions make it good for any kind of set and forget crop like winter squash, but for anything else that requires more maintenance, you can see a problem. I'm 6'2" with relatively long arms, and reaching the middle of the bed is difficult for me and impossible for everybody else in my household. So I'm going to take it apart. Of course, the first thing that I'm going to do is remove the irrigation drip lines from the surface. And as is becoming a very common theme in my garden activities of late, I am going to next scrape off the layer of wood mulch. If I have a previous recent video on my experience using wood mulch on a vegetable gardens, and I have opted not to continue using it. There's a number of reasons for this, and again, I do have the previous video if anybody's interested on the rundown of my experience using wood mulch on raised vegetable gardens. So once I'm done scraping this off, I am going to get to emptying this bed out. Hopefully I can find a place to store all of the soil and dirt temporarily, and then get to deconstructing it. All right, after a couple of days of lunch break work, getting some good exercise on my lunch breaks, the bed is gone. I've deconstructed it and salvaged as much of the lumber as I can, and the soil is in piles and in grow bags where I can fit it around my backyard here. So one issue that is present is the spot that the old bed was sitting on is a mound. It's a mounded dirt due to a tree root system and some other rocks and stuff that seems to be buried under there. This limits the footprint of the new beds I want to build, so I'm going to do a little impromptu landscaping and see if I can flatten it out. Okay, at this point I'm realizing the project is a bit of a Pandora's box. The root system was so extensive and substantial, I couldn't really chop up this mound and rake it out level. So I did what I didn't want to have to do, and that is build a retaining wall to create a larger level spot. I have these pavers that were actually laying scattered around our yard from the previous owners of the property, so these are coming in handy. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go buy more to finish this at the local Home Depot. And here's what I've come up with. I didn't show myself building this because I am the opposite of a mason. I do not know what I'm doing. I'm completely winging it. But what I'm doing seems to be working to a degree to create a larger level platform for the two new raised bed gardens that I am planning to construct. So here I am, and my daughter's play traffic cones are marking out the footprint of the new bed. And this is everything completely finished. I'll use that the term loosely, finished. Had to use some. I ran out of pavers that I bought and didn't want to spend more money, so toward the fence edge there, I piled up some rocks and cemented them together. And it doesn't look great, but I am not going to be looking at that part of the whole thing very often. So here's where we're at. Now I can finally get to the part that I've been looking forward to, which is actually building the raised garden beds. I'm building my raised beds primarily out of scrap lumber that I have laying around from prior projects, things that I built and deconstructed that maybe didn't work out the way I wanted them to. I call it my failure pile of lumber. So the first thing that I'm doing is I glued 2 lengths of 2x4s together multiple times, of course, to make my corner posts. I'm doing 2 beds that are have a footprint of 3.5 feet wide by 5 feet long. So I have to make 8 of these. So the first thing I've done, of course, is glue the 2 lengths of 2x4 together for each post. And now I am going to use my table saw to cut a good flat edge on them. This lumber has been sitting out in the elements, and of course a lot of it is bent, warped, twisted. And it came from Home Depot, so that's just, how they sell it, is pretty much always bent, warped, and twisted. But having at least a good flat sharp edge or two on your corner posts for this type of raised bed that I'm building makes life a lot easier. I was going to go so far as to build a purpose-built jointer sled for my table saw, but I ultimately was not willing to go quite that far for a box of dirt. And this is how I'm setting my table saw. And a big disclaimer here, what I end up doing is super dangerous. Don't do what I do. And you'll see why in a moment. But what I've done first is set my fence within a 1/4 inch of the blade. The idea being that I can roughly joint an edge or two of each corner post up against the fence of my table saw. And we're about to see how that worked, for lack of a better term. While my table saw is great for a lot of purposes, at the end of the day, it's still a pretty inexpensive model. It's what we would call a weekend warrior deal from Lowe's, and it just doesn't really have the power needed to efficiently cut through a block this thick and wide. So what ends up happening here is I am pushing way harder than I should for this, the purposes of safety. Don't do this. I realistically should have, abandoned this method and tried to come up with something different. But my brain sometimes still thinks I'm 21 and invincible, and, don't always do the safest things in life. So don't do this. I did power through it, and I got the edges on a lot of these, or most of them, flattened out so that when I go to put my top rails and sideboards on, everything's level and even, or level and even-ish. But I am being a bad example here. Use me as a cautionary tale of how not to use a table saw. Here are the corner posts with at least one edge cut relatively even, sharp, and flat. The next step is going to be to cut these down to length, even length, using my miter saw. I'm cutting my corner posts to a length of 26 inches. This probably seems excessive to people living in climates that actually get rain during the spring and summer, but I've found one of the most effective countermeasures to our long, hot, dry, rain-free summers is excessively deep garden beds. A lot of vegetable plants will put down tap roots way deeper than most people expect. For example, a tomato can put down roots as deep as 48 inches. And the deeper you go into the soil, the more moisture there is retained. And that means the less watering has to be done, and the less stress that plants undergo from drying out and recovering. There is a little bit of a method to what I'm doing here. I'm not just measuring 26 inches, making one cut, calling it good. I first take a little bit off of one end to even that up before measuring and making my other cut. The ultimate goal is to make these corner posts as close to completely square as I possibly can. Without specialized equipment like planers and jointers, there's only so much I can do, and also, I'm not willing to spend the time for a box of dirt to mill everything to the dimensions of like IKEA furniture or something. So there's still a bit of roughness, but still making your corner posts as square and even as possible is going to make life a lot easier moving forward. This is where I start to cut the length of my side rails, and I'm cutting these out of leftover 2x3s, and when it comes to garbage lumber, Home Depot 2x3s really take the cake. You could probably see right there that one, you could almost make a bow out of it, throw a string on it and shoot arrows. I'm really trying to keep costs down on this, and come up with a balance between something that looks okay versus having to spend, $100 extra on lumber, which I don't really want to or can't do. So there's only so much I can do for straightness, but as you'll see moving forward, there's a workaround to this. What I'm planning to do here is actually make 2 beds, each 3.5 feet wide by 5 feet long. I find that 3.5 feet is actually the sweet spot for comfort when it comes to garden bed width. 4 is okay, but 3.5 is a little more comfortable. So some of you might be also wondering, if I'm doing 2 3.5 by 5 foot beds, why not just do one 3.5 by 10? And the reason is that I'm one guy. I don't really have a second set of hands to help me with anything, and trying to build big things as one single person is really hard. Things tend to really go wrong. Building 2 smaller things, if you don't have somebody to like hold 2 boards together while you nail or screw them, is way easier than building one big thing. So here are my basic components, my basic garden bed parts, all ready to go. The one thing that I am going to do is I'm going to put some screws to hold these corner posts together. They're just kind of tacked together with wood glue, which would come right apart the first wet day that we have, which it is winter and we have some of those coming up. So I'm going to put some screws in those, and then we're going to get to assembling the beds. Now it's time to assemble the frame of the bed. This is just going to be arranging the corner posts and top and bottom rails into a frame. Pretty easy stuff. Honestly, if I can do this, absolutely anybody can. I have less than 0 inherent woodworking or carpentry skills. I struggle with a lot of very basic tasks in that area that most people don't. But even I can build a square box out of some chunks of wood. So it's one of actually the more gratifying beginner level projects to take on if you want to get into woodworking. So I'm assembling an end first, trying to make it so that the best pieces of lumber will be top and front, so it helps as you move along to label what is top, what is back, bottom, etc., etc. Have pencil handy. The only other little tip that I've found when it comes to these projects, springing for hex head screws is well worth the money. Standard Phillips head, I always end up stripping them and aggravating everything and swearing and spending a few extra dollars for a box of hex head. You'll never want to go back to Phillips. The other thing is not shown here, but if you work on solo woodworking projects, you can never have too many clamps. So those are a couple of tips from somebody who knows little about woodworking. All right, we're going to speed things up a little bit here. End 1 is assembled, working on end 2. And now it's time to do the side rails. I didn't realize how much of myself was out of frame here, but all I'm doing is using the side rails, top and bottom, to connect the 2 end pieces. You can see I have the most of the corner posts on what is going to be the inside surface of the bed. So, like I said before, really a simple process. The hardest part, if you don't have a partner to help you work on this, is making everything stay where it needs to when you put the screw in. If you don't pre-drill holes, like I often don't because I'm impatient and lazy, when you put your first screw in, the whole entire board will want to move. But if you incorporate clamps, sometimes you can work around that. And this is the skeleton of the bed. And you'll see in a moment what I'm going to do for the sideboards. When I disassembled the bed that I'm replacing, I was able to salvage a number of the boards from that. So I'm going to start by cutting some of these to length to make the sideboards for my new garden bed. Here they are. Figured I would skip footage of me cutting more boards to length over and over again at this point, but I've got a pile to start with here. You'll notice that these are cut short. There's a reason for that. So instead of doing horizontal long boards, I'm doing a number of vertical short boards for cheap, thin cedar fence pickets like I'm using here, short and vertical, offers way more strength than long and horizontal. And once I get into position here, you're going to see my approach. I'm going to be screwing these on to the inside of the bed, the inside of the frame, just for added strength. These are going to be holding quite each holding a large volume of dirt, or soil rather. Sometimes it is dirt, but let's say soil. So having these screwed in from the inside, it gives it more integrity. Some of my more hastily constructed garden beds that are just horizontal fence pickets nailed or screwed to four corner posts from the outside, those do really tend to bow outward. So I'm trying to avoid that with these new beds. I'm also putting just a little more effort into aesthetics. Since I will be looking at these, these are more visible from our kitchen window, and I don't want to look at something that's entirely ugly every morning. This method does take a little extra time, a little extra work, but I think it's definitely worth it in the long run. Here is the bed with most of the sideboards in place. I don't know if clapboards would be the appropriate term. I'll just call them sideboards. The gaps you see, that's because I'm going to have to custom rip some boards to width to fit in there. So I guess a word of warning about this particular style. This might not be the best if you don't have a table saw for ease of ripping boards to desired width. Ripping can be done with a circular saw, but it's a lot harder. And for somebody who can't make a straight line to save his life, like me, I personally wouldn't attempt it without a table saw. And here's the bed with all of the sideboards in place. I've cut some boards to length and filled those gaps in. To hide some of the crappy looking joints and rough edges at the top, I purchased a handful of 3-inch wide redwood fence pickets. I do almost all of this stuff with various fence pickets just because they're super cheap, and they're often milled from a rot resistant wood like cedar or redwood. So I'm just going to make a very simple top cap, for lack of a better term, for everything here using these. And here's the first bed, 100% complete. This one is the crappier of the two. It was made with the worst of the lumber that I had on hand to work with. So this will obviously be going in the back, behind the better looking bed, for lack of a better term there. The cool thing about this, another advantage to making two small beds like I have, is this is light enough for me to carry, move, and position on my own. It's really not heavy at all, as you can see here. No problems picking it up, moving it, and dropping it where it's going to be. Now it's time to assemble the second bed here, using having a little fun with time lapse. It's easy as a newbie to YouTube to maybe overuse time lapse, but I like it, so here we go. While I'm building this one, I'm going to say that I'm open to any ideas and suggestions for topics to cover that people might have. We're getting into a time of year where even in a warm climate like Sacramento, there's just not too much that can go on in terms of gardening. So if anybody is actually watching this, it's a new channel, and honestly, my viewership isn't high at this point. But if you do think I've got potential, you kind of like the direction I'm going here, I'm very open to ideas for topics that anybody would like me to cover. Obviously, they can't be anything that requires me to buy hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of supplies and equipment to try out, but I'm always open to doing experiments and trying new things. So, let me know in the comments. And And here bed 2 is completed. I've got to say I'm not entirely disappointed with how this looks, given I'm working with very rough beat-up lumber. This one was built with nicer looking materials. I actually had to buy additional cedar fence pickets for the sides, so it looks a lot newer and sharper. The contrast of the redwood with the rest of it, that's maybe a little bit jarring in terms of color combo, but everything within a few months is going to weather to pretty much the same color anyway. Here I have the two beds leveled and positioned where I want them, or roughly leveled. I didn't obviously, put a ton of time and work into making everything 100% perfect. The dirt under them is going to settle. The wood is going to expand and contract with changing moisture and temperature levels, and everything is going to go wonky within a few weeks anyway. So I got things so that, to the eye, everything looks pretty straight, even and level. That's good enough for me. So now it's time to refill. Because the combined volume of these two beds is actually greater than the one I replaced, I'm taking up a little space in the bottom with some wood chunks here and some of this wood mulch that I've been trying to get rid of. So the first 4 to 6 inches toward the bottom is just going to be biomass. This borrows to a degree from the hugelkultur method of gardening, which relies on a layer of like rotting logs and other clean biological material. I'll point out that there is no peer-reviewed research proving that the hugelkultur method is anything that works better than any other gardening method. But what I don't need peer-reviewed research to tell me is that it's easier on my bank account. So I won't have to buy or order in extra soil if I fill in a little bit of volume at the bottom with crap I have already on hand. My experience has been, and again, I don't have any scientific research to back up the statement, as long as the top 12 inches or so of a raised bed garden are good, nutrient-rich, organic matter-filled soil, what happens below that, barring any, toxic contaminants, doesn't really matter that much. So this is a good way to get rid of some of the mulch that I'm not going to continue to use, and a good way to save money as I refill here. After putting that mulch layer, I began to fill the soil back into the bed. When I was about a foot from the top, what I did was I added a good thick layer of compostable material, green, perfectly unfinished compost consisting of things like, chicken poop riddled hay from our chicken coop, weeds that I've cut, some kitchen scraps, stuff like that. By the time I plant anything in these beds in mid to late April, this will all have broken down into, good usable loamy compost. So, I'm not really worried about nitrogen tie-up or anything there. The soil that came out of that 6x6 bed that I took apart had been pretty depleted by the winter squash that I had going there all summer. So I knew I really needed to add some organics to it to revitalize it. The last thing I'm going to do is sow a nitrogen-fixing cover crop. In this case, I've got some clover seeds. This will, of course, the rhizomes and the roots of the clover will add nitrogen to the top layer of the soil. When it comes time to chop and drop before planting, that will become a mulch / compost layer. So the cover crop is a great way to put a bed to rest for the winter. I am honestly at this point glad to be done with this project. I've only been working on this whole thing during my very limited free time. So it's taken me the better part of a month to get this start to finish. The impromptu landscaping work that I had to do to work around that stupid mound of roots slowed me down, but I'm really fairly happy with how everything turned out. I'm usually typically pretty hard on myself with everything and how my projects turn out. I have the the tendencies of a perfectionist without the talent or skill to back that up. So things can be frustrating, but you know, I'm mostly okay with how this looks and how this turned out. The one final thing I might want to do is come up with some kind of ground cover to sow between the beds so it doesn't turn into a mud hole. I need to find some kind of mowable ground cover that will penetrate the clay soil that we have around here. That's proven to be a challenge so far. I might also take, when I am feeling bored and have free time, just take some sandpaper and get rid of those ink markings on the lumber. But other than that, I think it's time to call it on these and just wait for the cover crop to grow and wait for spring so I can put something useful in these. And that's all I've got. Thanks for watching.